Hello, welcome to my bookshelf, and today I'll be doing another Top 5 Wednesday video. And this week's theme are authors that you would love to write like. And I really like this topic. I think it's really unique. I think a lot of times we focus mainly just on the books themselves and not so much on the authors. And I think it's really cool to incorporate a list of authors this time. So this is really exciting for me, but also really challenging. And this is something I realized when trying to make this list, and I will just kind of throw out a disclaimer. So when trying to come up with this list, I realized that there's a lot of authors that I really enjoyed their work, but I realized I only read one book of theirs. And it just didn't feel right for me to include authors on this list that I've only read one of their stories. So I decided to only choose authors that I've read at least two of their stories. So with that being said, the only other disclaimer I want to say is J.K. Rowling isn't officially on this list because I think it goes without saying that obviously I would love to write like her. Like, she's the queen, right? She's amazing. I love Harry Potter. It's made such a big difference in my world. And yeah, I would love to be able to write like her. But since I don't want to waste a slot on the obvious, I am going to kind of just have her as be like an honorary author on this list. So with that in mind, let's jump into my actual list of the top 5 authors I would love to write like. So the first author I want to talk about is good old Douglas Adams. I have read his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I have the entire series, but I've only read like the first 2 books in that. So if you don't know, Douglas Adams was asked to write an episode for Doctor Who, which is a British TV series, which is amazing. And from my understanding, it was never actually put on air, but after all this time, Gareth Roberts actually turned his idea for this Doctor Who episode into a book. And when you read the book, you can tell, that this is a Douglas Adams story. It's got his, iconic humor in it as well. So that's just to kind of show that, yes, I've read more than just Hitchhiker's Guide from him. But yeah, I would love to write like Douglas Adams because he does have this humor and he's able to make, serious situations really fun. And I think that it can be difficult to try to be funny in books. I think sometimes they can fall flat, and I don't think that happens with Douglas Adams. He has a way of telling these amazing, awesome stories in and of themselves, but also make them really amusing and fun to enjoy. And I would love to be able to emulate that in my own writing if I were to start writing, which is probably something I should just say off the bat. I'm not a writer, but I would love to write. Maybe that's something I will do in the future. I don't know, but as of right now, I haven't actually written anything other than what I have to for school. But yeah, I have a lot of respect for authors, obviously, and I would love to write one day, but I haven't yet. And if I was a writer, I would love to write like Douglas Adams and incorporate that humor and that fun, but also be able to have just this awesome story underneath it all. So the next author on my list is Haruki Murakami, and I've read After Dark, I've read Kafka on the Shore, and I have a couple other of his books, but I haven't gotten to quite yet, but I'm very excited. He has a very unique writing style. He tends to write magical realism, so his books have lots of really bizarre elements to them, but they're just really well written, I think, and they're just really interesting and engaging, and it's about more than just throwing in these bizarre aspects to his book. It seems to be a lot about the characters as well and their own journeys with whatever is happening around them, whether it's normal or not. And I just think there's so much depth to his books that they lend themselves to being reread, and I think that's a testament to the author that makes you want to reread and redigest their work and to kind of figure out what exactly is all going on here. I think there's a lot of interesting imagery throughout his books as well because of the bizarreness, and so a lot of things that happen really stick out to you, and I think he's able to make some really interesting points and messages with his books because of the way he writes. Which again, I would love to emulate. And, you know, kind of going back to Douglas Adams a little bit, like there is kind of some humor in Murakami's work as well, which I appreciate. It's not completely serious, but there's still a lot of serious parts in his books. I think he balances it all really well, which is another thing I would just love about being able to write like Murakami. And a cool thing that Murakami does, at least in the book that I read, is he incorporates music into his work, which I think is so cool, and I would love to be able to do that myself. I think it really helps give a specific atmosphere to the scene that he's writing. And another thing about Murakami that I really love is how unique the stories are. I mean, not just because these bizarre things are happening, but also just because of the characters themselves. They're all really unique and really interesting to read about. And that's something that's important to me too. You know, if I was a writer, I want these stories to feel fresh and new in whatever way I can. And I think that Murakami's voice is very unique, and it would be something I would love to emulate in my own writing. So the next author on my list is Markus Zusak, and I think most people know him for The Book Thief, which I have read and absolutely loved. It's probably one of my favorite books of all time. Just so well written. And I've also read his book, I'm the Messenger, which I really like as well, but it is also pretty different from The Book Thief. There's definitely some similarities in as far as like you can tell this is written by the same person. They both talk about, you know, some serious, you know, dark issues, but there is still kind of that humor throughout as well, but it's not done in an irreverent way. It's done in kind of like a realistic way, you know. I think most people handle the hardships of life with, you know, some lighthearted humorness at times, and I think his characters are also something that I would love to be able to make characters like that. They're so full of depth, and they're just so interesting and unique, and they have their own flaws, but they feel like real people, which I think is a really important thing to do as an author. Because like to me, I'm more about the characters, I think, more so than necessarily the plot. I think both have to work to make an awesome book, but I think that if you have really good characters, you can kind of forego having a huge important plot. I like that he was willing to take the risk of writing a book set in World War II, especially since it's kind of oversaturated, but yet he did so well with it that it's become a book that I think most people appreciate and love and enjoy, even though, you know, some of the themes have been seen before, but I think he makes it his own and he makes it unique, and I really, really enjoy that. He takes risks, and he's able to just make the stories really fun to read as well. Like, even though we're talking about World War II, which is not exactly a fun-loving time, and the book has its sad moments as well, but I think it's balanced with just kind of humanness, which I appreciate. So it's just such a really well done book, and in I Am the Messenger, there's also some dark themes going on as well, just throughout the book, and again, he's able to make the story not just about this interesting thing that's happening to our main character, but it's also just about the characters themselves and their journey through this, which I think is really important, and again, something I would love to emulate as a writer, to make the journey the most important part of the story, and to be able to throw them in some really interesting situations, you know, to come up with these really interesting ideas that are worth telling, and to have your characters go through that and make it seem realistic and honest. And I really appreciate that from Zusak, is this honesty in his storytelling, but also just the enjoyability of reading his stories. Alright, the next author that I would love to write like is Ted Chiang, and he's kind of a special entry on my list because technically I've only read one book of his, but it was a short story collection, so I think it counts, you know. I got to see him write many different stories with completely different characters, so I think I have at least a decent sense of his short story writing abilities, which I think would also say a decent amount about his, you know, novel writing abilities as well, and just his writing in general. So he's on this list. Yeah, so I read Stories of Your Life and Others. It's more or less a science fiction short story collection, but there are some entries in that collection that aren't straight science fiction. but I think that tends to be his leaning. Some of the other ones are kind of theological in nature, which was surprising to me. And I think something that is a really big testament to his writing ability is the fact that there are a couple of short stories in there specifically about, more of the theological aspects that, like, I may not have agreed with his point and his conclusion to his story, but I still really enjoyed the story despite that. So even despite like my own differences between, like clearly the author and myself and like our opinions and our world views, I was still able to enjoy his writing, which I think is a huge testament as a writer. Everyone's different and everyone has their own unique point of view, and I think it's really difficult then to write a story that, might anger some people. But he does it in a really interesting to read way. Like, even though the story itself, like, I could kind of see where it was going and I wasn't exactly happy about that, I still wanted to finish the story and read it and see what happened next. So it was really engaging and interesting. Another thing about Ted Chiang that I appreciated was these concepts. I thought they were really unique, and like I said, most of them are science fiction, so he kind of takes this interesting idea, this kernel, and he just kind of takes it to the logical conclusion. And I found it really interesting, and also his ability to be able to explain these at times very complicated ideas to his general audience, who aren't necessarily like science majors and things like that. That's not an easy thing to do. So I appreciated that, again, he took some risks, and he had these topics that he was really passionate about and he wanted to write about it, and you can kind of get that from the stories, like how passionate he is about these things. And he just kind of went for it, and he was able to do it in a way that I think that most people will at least understand enough of the science to figure out what's happening. So I think that's an amazing talent to have as an author. And another thing too is that his characters are all very different from each other and very unique and really interesting people, and a lot of them are very flawed as well, which I appreciate. It makes it realistic, it makes it honest, and it makes it more engaging, I think, too, because you can kind of see yourself in these people, because they aren't necessarily these perfect people, but they're still worth reading about. And I think that all these stories are very different from each other, but they have some interesting common themes, I think, throughout some of them. It's really interesting to kind of compare them. So yeah, it was a great short story collection, and it made me really want to read more from him, but also I really just appreciate his writing, and I would love to be able to emulate some of that in my own writing. And the last author on my list that I would love to write like is Scott Hahn. And a lot of people may or may not know of him. He writes nonfiction, specifically about theology and Christian topics. I'm Christian, so yeah, that's something I really enjoy reading about as well. So I have a lot of books on Christian topics, and I think that's something that really makes Scott Hahn jump out at me specifically, is just that he is able to talk about these complex ideas in a really easy to understand way. I honestly think that anyone reading it can understand what he's talking about, and I think that if you've ever read the Bible or like ever had like a theological discussion with someone, these things aren't necessarily as easy to explain as you would expect them to be. And he just does a really good job with it, and I really enjoy his writing. It's very straightforward, it's very honest, and yeah, he has so many different books and so many different topics, and every single one that I've read I really enjoyed. I've kind of almost like taken notes on it. It's almost like a textbook if you're like interested in those kinds of topics. So yeah, I would love to be able to write about those things in that kind of way, and be able to, like synthesize these grand ideas into something that everyone can relate to and, take for themselves in their own lives. So I would love to be able to emulate Scott Hahn in my writing as well. Alright, so as you can see, I tried to make this a diverse list, to have lots of different kinds of authors from different kinds of genres, because I'm not a writer, I don't really know what kinds of books I would write. So I just picked some authors from different kinds of genres and backgrounds that I would love to be able to write like if I were to write books similar to them. So I hope you appreciated this list. I'd be really curious to see yours. That is my list. I hope you enjoyed it. I just want to, as always, thank you guys for watching my video, and until next time.